if you're not willing to do the work and put the hours in and all the things that we're going to share with you today, it doesn't matter how educated you are. It doesn't matter what kind of backing you have. It doesn't matter if money is no object, right? To start what it is that you're trying to start. If your willingness cannot match and intersect with your capability.
All right, let me know how you feel about
Burn
that. I got
it
next Thursday.
down.
Sorry, we're doing mic checks right now.
Burn it down.
All right.
Burn
Bye.
it down.
They laugh every time. I don't know why.
Y'all are an easy audience. Audio testing. Good morning. Hello. What up? Burn it down. What up, everybody? Welcome back to this episode of You've Gotta Hear This. Today, we are going unscripted.
What?
Our producer and our director are both out of town today.
What's up?
So, unscripted. We have some chicken scratch. That's it. But what up? We are going unscripted, just a conversation. And as promised, we want to take you to how to start a business, which we are well versed in at this point, and we want to help you learn that. But before we get there, we'll say there are a ton of podcasts. The market is so saturated on how to start businesses.
It's true.
Maybe you're a photographer, maybe you are an artist, maybe you are in the technology space, whatever. There are so many podcasts out there. Just go find your lane. They're going to teach you how to be the best at the niche that you're in. We are going to talk about starting a childcare business specifically towards the latter part of this episode. Right. But I think there's going to be some great just principles that everybody, small business owners, people who are starting stuff will get on board with.
Absolutely right. And today, what you have got to hear is that if you want what others don't have, you have to be willing to do what others don't do. We did not come up with that. It's very important to me that that's not an original thought. So many people have said that throughout history. I think Thomas Jefferson said a version of that. Jerry Rice said a version of that. And today, Tyler Tullis just said another version of something that other people have said. But the principle is true.
Say it again. What do people gotta hear?
If you want what other people don't have, you've got to be willing to do what other people don't do. And this is what we've seen so many times in the 20 years that we've been married, the 10 years that we've been in business, the 15 years that we've been in ministry and church starting, church planting, is that there are so many highly capable people in this world. We interact with them every day. They are smart. They are sharp. They are intelligent. They are innovative. They are creative. They have all of these amazing things going for them. And they are high on the capability scale. But at the same time, while they're highly capable, their willingness is oftentimes not in the same quadrant, right? If you're looking at a graph, like the capability is up high, but the willingness is way down low. And if you're not willing to do the work and put the hours in and all the things that we're going to share with you today, it doesn't matter how educated you are. It doesn't matter what kind of backing you have. It doesn't matter if money is no object, right? To start what it is that you're trying to start. If your willingness cannot match and intersect with your capability, then baby, you got a recipe for failure.
It's good stuff. And if you're watching this and you're like, I don't think I'm a capable person, maybe you don't have an MBA. Listen. Check. We don't either. We're pastors.
What are some other things we don't have?
We're pastors and we never went to seminary. Check. Started businesses, neither. You have a degree. You have a bachelor's of science in business administration.
Business management. But the thing about that is that degree was more of the fastest way for me to get through college without having to take a foreign language.
And you never planned to go to get your MBA afterwards.
Yeah, I was done with Spanish after high school. No offense to Spanish-speaking members of our audience. It never stuck with me. It wasn't my thing.
No, it's true. Spanglish at best at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to a mentor of ours when we were getting started in the early education space. And I asked him, I'm like, I feel like there's just so much I don't know. Should I go? Should I get an MBA? There's a lot of women's programs out there to get you going. He actually is a former Harvard Business School alumni, and quote, his words, the president of that alumni association, he said, quote, these words, No, that'll be a waste for you. You're already doing what you'll learn how to do in school.
Mm-hmm.
You're already doing it. So this is where the willingness, it doesn't matter if you have that degree. It doesn't matter. Obviously, there's some spaces that you need certifications and licensing in that you'll have to go pursue. But for the most part, this idea that you're talking about, Tyler, the willingness to just step out there and start a business is crucial, and not just the willingness to start, but the willingness to go the long haul.
That's right.
To see it accomplished,
and
right?
a lot of times willingness to figure it out can make up for the lack of capability that you have right now. If you don't have the full understanding of what it is that you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, what you're trying to start, the willingness to get there, that'll carry you a lot further than capability, I think, can take you on its own.
Yeah, I had a recent coaching call with somebody who asked us for coaching, and this person shared that they have all of these dreams and ideas.
There's more.
There's more in them than they feel like they're living. Book ideas and business ideas, and they could do this. They want to get started in real estate, but they just don't know where to start. She said, I watch your podcast, I follow you on social, and it's just so inspirational.
She's the one.
What do I need? What do I need to do to make it happen where I can create margin? Because I've got kids and we've got jobs, and the jobs aren't able to just carry us where we can live passively to start all these things for us. So what do we need to do to create margin? And so I had this call and I said, margin doesn't just exist. Margin just doesn't exist.
You're not going to have appear out of thin air.
You're not going to have all this extra time. And when we got towards the end of the call, really where she got to was she had to figure out, what am I willing to let go of? What am I willing to take on? It really is all about willingness to get there. So we're going to give you 3 things in this podcast, and then we're going to get to specifically how to start a childcare center business. We're going to give you the broad strokes, nuts and bolts. If you want more, you can book a coaching call with us later. We can help you strategize. But we're going to give you 3 things that you've got to be willing to do no matter what space you're trying to occupy.
Said. Do you want to do number 1?
Let's do a little coffee, just a little.
Oh, a little clink, a coffee clink.
And we'll take this time, if you've never subscribed to our podcast channel or our newsletter, you ought to head to our website, you'vegottahearthis.com, where you can subscribe, you can stay up to date, you can even follow us on social. It's going to be right there on the screen, and we'd love to have you aboard so you can stay up to date with new podcasts as they drop.
We missed a moment right there.
What?
What if these cups said, "You've got to hear this," the brand, and then we clinked that?
That's a plan long term, but we need some sponsors first before we start having branded coffee mugs.
Call for sponsors. Anyway, number 1 on the willingness scale. Number 1 on the willingness, what you've got to be willing to do is you've got to be willing to take a risk. And of course, that's no doy, right?
It is true.
Every business podcast is going to be like, yeah, you got to take a risk.
Sure.
But maybe this is just reiterating the most obvious part of this. Risk, you cannot avoid it in starting something new. Starting things is risky. By design, it's risky.
So many people are risk adverse. We recently hired a financial planner, and they sent us, which listen, we're 41, and we just now are engaging with a financial planner. So if you are like, I can't even spell those words, do not feel bad. We have been in the business sector for 10 years building our life. We probably should have had a financial planner about 5 years ago. It's like another thing to do. So don't feel bad if you don't have a financial advisor, but we just started one because we're like, we need to probably think about retirement. And so anyways, he sends us a document that is assessing our risk adverseness. What's it called?
Risk. Like how willing to take risks we are.
Willing. Boom. You got to be willing. That was not planned. And
None
but
of this
but
is
it,
planned.
it's if you were to invest X dollars and the market were to do Y, what would you want us to do? It's like a series of choices. And it was like, A is the least risk possible. B is risky. C is like, oh, it's really risky. D is like so much risk.
Push it all in.
What you need to know about Tyler and I is we are letter D on every single answer. We will take the risk, all in, let's go it. But you may not be that way. You may be bubble A on the survey of how risk adverse you are.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. And I'm just going to tell you, if you're bubble A, if that's the personality you are, then just level set with yourself. You may not be the kind of person that's going to be like, yeah, let's second mortgage our house and step out there and ask all my friends and family for money to start this dream that's in my head. Level set with yourself, because I think frustration comes along the process when you're trying to be somebody that you're just not. Maybe you need to invest in somebody's business instead of starting your own. You just may not have the capacity and the capability to want to take on the risk that actually getting something going requires. So I think that's first is know yourself, like truly be honest with yourself. But if you're just the kind of person that you feel like you have that capability in you, take this as a moment for just to hear us push you a little bit and take the risk, right?
Yeah.
10 years later, after taking some ginormous risks, what would you say to Tyler and Crystal at 20? How old are we now? 41. When we were starting to take all these risks, we were 28. What would you say to those people 12, 13 years ago now?
That whole risk reward thing, it's true. Greater the risk, the greater the reward.
The bigger the risk, the greater the reward.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I would also say what felt so risky 12, 13 years ago doesn't feel nearly as risky as what we're talking about now.
It's true.
Like when you think about it, it only scales up, right? And that's life's trajectory. That's the way it's supposed to go. It just goes up and up. What we learned in taking the risks 12, 13 years ago has prepared us for the risks that we're exploring now. And they're worth it. And that's what I say, it starts what feels like huge, but until life grows, you don't really see how actually it wasn't really that risky.
Yeah, so here's the things you're risking at the beginning. You're risking your reputation. You got to just get real comfortable with that. People are going to talk bad about you behind their back, your back. They're going to doubt you. They're going to think you're stupid.
Yep.
Because remember, most people are risk adverse. So if you step out there to be like, I'm going to start this business while I'm working my job and we're going to be able to do this, you're not going to have an overwhelming sense of support. You just got, so one, the risk you're taking is I'm going to be like a lone ranger. I've got to blaze this path and I got to be okay that the crowd's not going to come along with me. That's one thing you're risking. Second thing you're risking is you are probably risking some financial peace for a while. It may be chaotic for a while. You're not real sure if you're going to see your money back in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Mm-hmm. So you got to be comfortable with that. And then the third thing I think you just got to know that you're risking is you're risking like perfect home life balance.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue to the second thing you have to be willing to do.
Take us there in this unscripted episode.
You have to be willing, in this case, to risk your time, or another way to say that is to really have no margin for extra stuff for a season.
For a season.
It's important to put, there's a start.
Willing to let it go.
There's a start and a finish line to that statement, but you've got to be willing to let some of the things that you have grown so comfortable and accustomed to, you got to be willing to let those things go.
Like, what do you think those things are that most people aren't willing to let go of?
I'm not like proud of this, but I'll tell you, I didn't work out one time in my 30s. Like I didn't go to the gym a single day. Like we probably pretended at the start of a new year for a couple weeks.
Walk in our neighborhood or something.
Yeah, I didn't walk my dog. I didn't take leisurely strolls through the park. If it wasn't kids or grind or trying to become a better follower of Jesus, I didn't have margin for it.
Yeah, there was no playing pickleball back then.
What's what I'm saying? Like rest is important, and we were intentional about rest. I'm not saying burn yourself out, but there was no, we got an hour and a half every morning to go do back and by at the gym.
We've said it before, and we'll probably say it hundreds of other times in this podcast. The willingness to grind.
Mm-hmm. Frozen foods are huge in this season. I'm sorry, these thoughts are just coming
to my head. The willingness to grind, like at the cost of healthy eating for a while, working out, like all you're doing, both ends of the stick. I know that goes all against modern like mental health, but I'm just telling you, if you're going to do what nobody else does, if you want the life nobody else has, I'm just telling you, there's no like perfect, 9 to 5 and I'm going to take my mental health day and this is my day for me. I'm going to get I would just venture that every billionaire in the world has, until they got to the point where they could financially afford to outsource things, where they had a private shelf to eat healthy and they had a private trainer and now they've got the passive income so they don't have to grind as hard. In the beginning, think about every major advancement, our cell phones, our computers. Those people worked nonstop. The development of the country we live in.
Right.
So like this idea that our generation has held on to, I can achieve my goals and I can do it all within a 5-day work week, or I want a 4-day work week, I just think is rubbish, and we got to let that go. Like, you've got to be willing to grind, right?
Yeah, maybe there's a podcast somewhere else on this podcast sphere that tells us we're wrong about that. But in our experience, you got to be able to lay some things down, to put some hopes, dreams, and aspirations on the shelf so that you can work towards the actual hope, dreams, and aspirations that's going to build the life that you love.
I think at the end of the day, we all have limitations, and this podcast is trying to help people defy limitations, but you can't defy time. Like, you only have 24 hours in a day. You only have so much money. If you've got kids, you can't neglect them. That's like a big no. So
it's frowned upon in most states. Frowned upon.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, like, margin doesn't exist. Now, if you are at a place where you can financially afford to outsource and create margin, then you should. Like, recently, because of some things we're taking on and some expansion goals that we have, we've outsourced our meals. We've hired a private chef. Shameless plug for Walk Theology. You've got to get them in your home.
Maybe they'll sponsor our mugs.
Maybe. Yes.
Walk Theology.
They are incredible. They cook healthy meals for our family. We get home 8 o'clock at night. We pop it in. It's incredible, and it's healthy too, right? But there was a day we couldn't do that. We lived on mac and cheese,
frozen foods,
and frozen lasagna from Costco.
Which is a quality lasagna. If we're going to talk about lasagna, that's a quality.
It's a quality. But there's people I've talked to in coaching, and they're like, "Oh, I want to do that, but I can't give up cooking healthy meals every day for my family." Okay. Again, know yourself. If you're bubble A, be bubble A, but level set your expectations. You may not build a huge business empire and write all the books in your brain. And that's okay. Yeah. You can invest in other people's dream so that you can keep living in your life. So you got to be able to take a risk. You got to be willing to have zero margin for a season.
Yep. And the other piece that comes with having zero margin is when there's like really no room for margin, that leaves a lot of room for what feels like chaos. And so if you're going to get there,
it doesn't feel like chaos. It is chaos.
Well, yeah. But you got to be willing to embrace that. You can't let that shut you down. Like, you have to be willing to embrace the chaos. There have been moments and seasons, and we've got stories for days. We might have some time to tell a couple, but not a ton. But we have stories for days of just like legit what people look at and be like, how are you still standing up right now? Like, how are you still living? Have your kids eaten? Just chaos.
Yeah, they ate mac and cheese.
We've shown up to church before with our kids not having on shoes, and like we didn't even realize it. Like, chaos.
We have to tell that story. Legit, chaos. We went and we're pastors, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Easter Sunday.
That's like the Super Bowl for Christians. Sundays. It's big.
This is circa like 2016, I want to say. We were starting our childcare business because this was the most chaotic. 2016, we opened. Okay, 2016, we moved into the building that we're in now as a church, which was a major step of risk, aka faith. Doubled our rent without doubling of tithes and offerings on how we're going to pay for it. Yep. We, at the same few months, took on our childcare center business on hard money, which we're going to tell you here in just a second. So we're living in major chaos, and we're trying to do both at the same time. Oh, and by the way, we have 4 young kids. In 2016, they were all under 8 years old. Yep. So like chaotic, like when you talk about chaos. And on Easter Sunday, I'll never forget, we all load up, come to church, awesome services. We take family pictures. We're driving back and forth from Newton, Mass, where our church is, to Plymouth, Mass, where we were staying while we were Airbnb-ing our house so that we had the cash flow to start our business. So we get home on Easter Sunday. We've driven an hour and a half back to the house we're staying at. We get to the house, And maybe we can maybe we can work this in on YouTube, put this clip in. So maybe you can watch like this clip of our social media. But Peter Bow, our third kid, we get home and Tyler says, Peter, where's your other shoe? And he goes, I don't have one. And we were like, did you ever have another shoe today? And he was like, nope, couldn't find it.
He said it was wet and I didn't want to wear it.
So we go back and we look at our family pictures. There's Peter, only one shoe the whole time. And then we started like texting everybody, like our team at church. We were like, did you see Peter with no shoe on today? And they were like, oh yeah, we just thought that was normal because that back then,
embracing the chaos.
That was the status of our life. With shoes, without shoes, with socks, without socks. It's all right. Just get in the car. We will figure it out once we get there.
Yeah. And on the other side of a season of embracing chaos, and this is not about parenting, so we'll just do a detour here on this today's episode. But like our kids we love them, and your kids are great too. Our kids are awesome. And I think it's because...
It's kind of true. They are awesome.
I think it's because they've lived through the chaos. They watched how mom and dad handled it. And now there's really not much that comes at them that they're like, yeah, we can't handle that. That's too much. It shuts them. Like they just...
Like they're very independent.
They go with it.
Self-starters, all A's.
One shoe, two shoes,
go
no
to
shoes.
Achieve.
They just get after it. And they're great.
And I think that's maybe going back to the things you got to be willing. Like you cannot be in control of everything all the time. Like it's okay if your kids haven't bathed today, right? It's okay if you didn't have that perfectly balanced 3-course meal for every meal. It's okay if you're eating dinner in front of the TV again. It's okay if the kids aren't in bed right at 7:30 and they're in bed late again.
And there's dirty dishes in the sink.
And you're late to school the next day. Let go of that control. Again, you've got to be willing. You've got to hear this. If you want the life nobody else has, you've got to be willing to live like nobody else is.
Yeah.
And remember, we're saying this is a season. You can't live like that your entire life.
Yeah, you got to get through
Then there's no health. But for a season, you've got to be willing to embrace that chaos.
That's awesome.
So what we're going to do now is really take you through. And so if you're done, you've got all you want, turn off the podcast. But if you're interested in how to start a childcare business with if you're in the right market, they are very liquid, profitable businesses, which is why we're passionate about starting them and helping other people start them. And I don't know if you even know this, but there is a childcare crisis in the whole U.S. There's not enough childcare centers. There's not enough, let me say it this way. There are very few quality childcare centers, which is why we got into the business. We had 3 little ones at the time, right? 3 or 4, I can't remember. We were trying to put our own kids in childcare, but money was really tight. We went to
and childcare is really expensive.
And yeah, it's very expensive, even 10 years ago. And it's astronomically worse. But we went to these childcare centers, we were touring them, and I just remember thinking like, these places are disgusting. And they're like the big box brand name, reputable places. And I was
Can I interject something
sure.
there? Our friend, I won't quote her, but she has a theory of parents. You know what I'm about to say? Mm-hmm. She has a theory amongst parents of children that have children in daycare that if you ask them, they say, oh yeah, my kid's daycare, it's awesome. I love it. It's the best. It's perfect. It's everything, blah, 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 blah. And she would say that if you went in there, you'd look around and be like, no, this place is not the best. But it's a parent's mindset of, because I want it to be the best for my kids,
there's so much parent guilt.
Sell it as the best. So it's
there's so much parent guilt, right? Because you're dropping your kid off. Some kids spend 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, right? And no shame. Like, you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, I walked around those places and I was like, we can do better. And so that's our passion, is can we bring quality childcare to the market, right? That's what we've been trying to do here in Massachusetts, where there is a shortage. And that comes with its own challenges. There's a reason there's a shortage. Buildings don't exist. We're landlocked everywhere you go. Staffing is a shortage, especially since the pandemic. So by no means should you be hearing that this is an easy business to get into, but we want to tell you our story and give you some practical steps if you're looking at where could I invest, what could I be a part of. We want to make the case that childcare is a great industry to get into, and it needs quality investors to be a part.
So let's get this going here, Crystal. How to start a child care biz. And again, this is stuff that we've learned. Other people may say it differently. They might say it better, but this is our podcast. So this is how we're going to say
And it's
it.
the experience we've lived.
On You've Got to Hear This. First is you got to decide what sort of model you want to follow in getting into. And there are plenty of them. Are you on that ABCD scale from earlier? Are you a full risk taker person? Let's push all in. Let's find out a way to personally start this, personally own this, personally finance this. Is that your tolerance for risk?
Which is going to have the greatest reward.
The greatest reward. That's an option. You could privately own it. That's one model.
That's how we do it. We privately own. Right now we have 2 centers with 5 more in development.
That's right. And then, so you could go that route. You could go the home daycare route, which in our state is an option. And I'm pretty sure every town, there is a zoning, there's a, what's the word?
Zoning protection.
Protection, right? Even if you're in a residential zone, you can still operate a daycare in your home. The numbers are lower, but you have the opportunity to use the asset of your home to build a business that way.
But you would be one of the sole, you have to really love kids at that point, because you would be one of the sole care providers. You might have some assistant staff, but you would be the director, and it's usually around 6 or no more. Like here in Massachusetts, it's 6 kids or less in your home. Mm-hmm. So just imagine, do I want to be around 6 kids all day? That's got to be something you think about.
6 kids that are not your kids.
Not yours.
That's an important piece
of that puzzle.
Little nugget to throw out there as well. And then there's, like in every business, there's a franchise option. There are some nationwide programs, some nationwide brands, maybe even more regional brands that you could look into purchasing a franchise. Again, the risk side of it is going to be lower. The cost side of it is going to be significantly higher. I can't know if I can say significantly, but
I would say significantly, because I've looked into that, and the reward even a little bit lower because your investment in is so higher, so it's going to take longer to see your distributions. Sure. That's right.
So you got to decide that model that works for you.
And we ultimately decided. So let's tell the listeners how we came in on what we were doing. It's a true story. So we were flipping houses. This was back in 2015. We had flipped a house. We had finally paid off all of the credit card debt that we had taken on to live in Massachusetts while we were getting our church started. And we were at net zero. So we were let's find another property.
Let's push it all in again.
Let's push it all in to hopefully get ahead, get a little bit more money back in the bank. And so we were looking for our next property, found this property in Norfolk, Mass. that had been a childcare center, but it was zoned in a residential neighborhood. And it had been a childcare center for 30 years. It had been a town staple, but had been run to the ground. The current owner was ready to sell it. And so flippers were looking at it because it was zoned. It looks like a house, and it was zoned in a residence. Flippers were circling it to flip it back into a single family home. Yep. So I went there as a flipper, and Tyler had sent me, he couldn't get there. And so I'm walking around with all the other.
Do you know why I couldn't get there? Because I was embracing the chaos.
With the children?
Somewhere.
Who knows?
Some chaos.
And so I was looking at that house. The land was too big. The lot that it sits on was too big for it to make sense to be the single family. The neighborhood comps didn't support what it needed to be. So it wouldn't work as a flip. So I started looking at childcare, and we had been looking for a place to put our kids, so I knew how much people were paying. I also just did a quick Google search, pulled up my phone, and I found out that nobody in Norfolk was providing infant or toddler care, but there was a commuter rail, and still is a commuter rail into Boston in that town.
You're kind of doing
and that's right. I'm about to get there.
Perfect.
Remember, this is unscripted.
She's doing awesome.
And I did a quick just Google search, saw that nobody was doing infant or toddler care,
which is what we needed
but there was a commuter rail, so I was like, there's got to be families here that are commuting into Boston to work. This was before the pandemic, and I guarantee you, if we could open just a few spots, it would be filled tomorrow. And so the story goes, I text Tyler and I said, hey, do you want to start a childcare center? And he texts back, sure. And that is how we started. And when I think back on those days, it was truly chaotic. That's number 2 here on how to start a childcare business is, one, you got to decide your model. Two, which we didn't have money to take on a franchise at that point. There's no way we could have done that. I am not staying at home with anybody else's kids but my own. And so this kind of idea of being a privately owned and operated childcare center was the way for us to go.
That was our only option.
And then number two, if as you start a childcare center, really any business, this is bread and butter, is you've got to know your market. So this is where you study your demographics and you study your demand. So very quickly, what I did is I called all of the competitors in the area, 3 or 4 towns around Norfolk, and I just said, hey, I've got an infant, toddler, preschooler. I do this to this day. Can you tell me what your rates are and what are your wait lists for September? And that's how I assess. And if I see that all of those childcare centers are full, or there's a demand, or they're 90 or 80% full, then I'm like, okay, how can I disrupt the market here? The way I can disrupt is by bringing in quality, right? Everything's brand new. All the materials are nice. We're going to run our staff differently. And that's the decision that we've made. We pay our staff higher than the industry standard, higher than any competitors. We offer full benefits. We are trying to do what the franchisors that have the bigger models, the shareholders behind them, we're choosing to put our profits back into the people that are doing the work. We're still making plenty of money to support our family, but we're trying to change the game and disrupt the market. And we really felt like the only things that were on the market at the time were these little mom and pop in-home daycares with one worker, or the huge, what I call just baby meals with 2-3 toddler classrooms, 2-3 infant classrooms, 2-3 preschool classrooms.
Like a few hours a day kind of stuff.
But they're not, and I'm not saying those people aren't passionate about early education, but what I felt like what our market needed was like the best of both worlds, like bringing in a smaller school that still had the best things about the bigger schools with the education experience, but also has that small kind of community boutique vibe that a home daycare could provide. So that was what we decided to do. So our model provides care for 7 infants, which is the max group size in Massachusetts. Your state may be different, 9 toddlers, and 20 preschoolers. So our model, we only need about 3,000 square feet to be successful, just to give you an idea what you might be looking for. Yeah. But you have to know your demographics. You have to know your demand. You can't just put a business anywhere,
right?
Because then you'll be struggling from the beginning.
Yeah, and you actually alluded to what we've identified as our next part of this process. Is having the idea is great, knowing the demographics is what's the word? Vital, right? Like you can't not know it. But if you don't have a place for these kids to go every day and moms and dads to drop them off, then you don't have a childcare business. So you have to identify a building. You alluded to it just a moment ago. Based on our state's requirements, we can operate our business model in like about 3,000 square feet. That's really the minimum. We can certainly use more, and we do use more based on what's available.
And it has to have outdoor space.
Yep, that's a big key, because you got to tire the little rugrats out. You got to give them some place to stretch their legs. But
by state law, they have to have X number of minutes per day in sunlight outside. Rain or shine.
That's a good law. But so you got to identify a building. The one caveat, because this is the part of our whatever we have going here that I end up taking on a lot of the responsibility for, is it's as important to identify the right building in the right town with the right outdoor space and all the other things that you have to have as it is to identify the right landlord, assuming you're not going to be your own landlord. If you've got financial backers and you can buy a building, like, more power to you. In our world, that is not so much an option for us.
Talk
just
about that
the price
for a little
points.
bit.
It's not
the advantages
the numbers
of owning
don't
versus
work.
renting.
Yeah, the numbers don't work. The liability is much higher, not just in like the liability of ownership, but the values of properties, commercial properties that would work for this use. The numbers don't work. You end up putting so much cash or capital into the business that you're not getting back out of it. It doesn't make any sense. If you can find one that can rent for the right numbers and the numbers work, in our experience, and we do own a couple of what we work with, but it's because the numbers work. So if the numbers don't work to own, then you need to be looking at leasing. And if you are looking at leasing commercial space, the building is important, but the landlord is also important. If you have a great building and a nightmare landlord, holy monkeys, Batman. Like, you are going to like that'll be the longest 10
What
years
was that
of
you
your
just
life.
said? Holy monkey.
Monkeys, plural, Batman. It just came from a spurt, so I just went with it. All right. Holy monkeys,
Spirit.
Batman. A nightmare landlord will make a dream building be like, get me out of here. I can't take it anymore.
It's true. So so this is number 3, we're talking about how to start a childcare center business, is you've got to identify a building. So for us, we had found that building. This one we had to buy. So let's talk to you about how we bought this building, because you've got a couple of ways. Because you may be thinking, how do I get a landlord to talk to me? We're a startup. How do I buy a building? I don't have anything. Where there is a will, there is a way. Because remember, it's all about the willingness you're willing to take on if you are willing to take a risk. So for us, because this house / childcare center was zoned in a residence, we did not have, I forget how much it was for sale for, $350,000 or something like that. We didn't have $350,000, and a bank, just so you know, so you don't get frustrated, level set, a bank is not going to just, like the SBA, the Small Business Administration, isn't looking to just give out loans to people who are startups. So if you do not have 2 years of financials, you better just know it's going to be an uphill climb. It is possible. So we started that route. We went to the banks, we went to the SBA. They all laughed us out of their office. They want to see proven models. Banks are bubble A, very risk adverse, right? So we went to a more risky option, and we went to what's called a hard money lender. So we tell this now, people are like, you bought this building with hard money. If you don't know what hard money is,
Google it.
There's probably
It's
a podcast
terrifying.
about it. But basically, we bought money, if that makes sense. We bought money at about 12% interest. Every time you have 6 months to pay it back. Every time you extend, you pay points to buy that money even more.
It's a mess.
And so it was a mess. So we bought that money, because of course he sees 2 suckers like, do that, and then I'll own collateral. But
Worked out.
it worked out. We knew that the chicken math on the napkin was, hey, we took that risk. If we can fill it, we'll be able to get this done. We eventually bought the building in a more traditional sense. And that's how we got that. So again, where there's a will, there is a way. There's so many creative financing things out there now that didn't exist a decade ago, to be quite honest, that could help you figure that out. But when you look at a building, you've got to make sure, I'll just say this about childcare, your state regulations are very important. It's not just that it has enough square footage. You also got to think about where plumbing is. Are there toilets in the right places? Because you need toilets in the toddler classroom, in your preschool classroom. Do you have additional plumbing lines for sinks and for hand washing and bottle prep? Your state regulations, depending on where you are, going to specify all of that. And you may be sitting here thinking, how do I know the state regulations? This leads us to number 4 on how to start a childcare center.
Yeah, you got to find your funding. You got to identify how you're going to do this. If people that are looking to invest, that's great. If you got to do this the bootstrap method and you just got to figure it out, that's great. Like however it works for you, but the funding is critical. We had no real investor, right? Like it was just like, hey, here's a bunch of money, go start this. And so we had to bootstrap our way through it. We had to rent our house on Airbnb. We had to sleep on air mattresses.
Yeah.
We had to do the beans and rice, and we had to do all those things, and totally worth it. No regrets, right? But a part of that process was identifying our funding and finding the method that we were going to do it, because without funding, you can't hire a director. And in our state, you cannot have a childcare license without a director. You can't even apply until you've hired a director. So you got to have funding for director hires and other staffing hires based on your state's regulations, based on the building that you find and the landlord that you find. You're going to need funding for tenant improvements. If you got to move walls or put new flooring in move toilets and plumbing around, you're going to need funding for tenant improvements. And you got to have the little toddler furnitures and the little bookshelves and cribs and steam mops and
the fence
paper
for the playground.
Paper towel. You got to have a paper towel budget that will blow your mind. The paper towel budget is insane. And then just other overhead stuff like staffing, like paper towels, goldfish and snack crackers and all that sort of stuff.
Most people ask us, how much does it cost to start a childcare center? So just to give you a round number as you're listening to this podcast, thinking about this. And again, I'm going to say these numbers, and I don't want you to just count yourself out, because where there's a willingness to take risk and a willingness to grind, you can figure it out.
It's true.
On the low end, if you were just to go rent a building, let's say it's 3,000 square foot, in Mass, you're going to pay somewhere between 25 and 35 a foot for square footage. Depending on where you are, you just do
Zip
that
codes,
math.
yep.
Most landlords will want a security deposit up front.
2 to 3 months
2
rent.
to 3 months rent. And so you're looking on the low end, probably $50,000 to pay for your furnishings and to secure your rent. On the high end, if it needs tenant improvements, outdoor space, if you've got to turf it, if you've got to add a fence, you're looking at probably $200,000 to $250,000 if you're just renting solely. If you're buying a building, that's a whole nother thing. You're going to need cash down payment and escrow and closing costs and all those fun things. So you got to take that. Those are like the 5 steps. We did it in an unscripted way, but just to recap those, you need to decide the model. Are you going to do franchise, home daycare? Are you going to be privately owned and operated? You've got to study your demographics and you've got to know your demand before you decide where you're going to land. Once you've identified the right market, you've got to identify a building, know your landlord. Number 4, you've got to identify a director. That's one thing we didn't talk about. When we found a director, because we knew we couldn't even apply for licensure without having a director, I just went to Indeed and I literally just found a director on Google, like a job ad on Google, like a sample template. And then I posted that. And so we found the building on a Wednesday, put the ad up on a Friday. I identified our executive director, Erica Douglas, who's still with us 8 years later. She had never started a childcare center. She wasn't happy where she was. I told her, I met her at a Starbucks and Target, and I was like, I have no money to pay you. This is the vision we see. This is what we want to do. She loved the vision because she had been in early education for 25 years at that point. And she was like, I'd love to be a part of this. I'll come on and just kind of take a risk with you. And that's how we hired her. And she's the one that then knew all the regulations, how to find the rest of the staff and those sorts of things. We prorated her salary. We worked out some benefits for her that she wouldn't get anywhere else. We give all of our directors unlimited time off. And we're just able to sweeten the deal to do what those bigger franchises can do that we may not have the money to do. So finding that director is really important. And then she's the one that took us through that licensing application process. And then kind of upon all of that, you want to identify the funding. Once you can get, just so you know, once you can get people filled, this is a very liquid business model. You can just do the chicken scratch in your own market to see what you're going to do, but it's a really great investment that can see a ton of ROI. And I think it really brings a service that's needed to the market today. So hopefully that helps how to start a childcare center business. Really, it comes down to
A what?
a business.
Business.
Really, it comes down to the vision in your head. I'll tell you something. Starting our childcare center, we just fell into that. And I'm so glad we took the risk, embraced the chaos. I'm glad we lived with no margin for a season because it changed not only the financial landscape of our family, but also it has propelled more vision for our church, right? Like we feel more confident to take things on because we know that we can create another childcare center to fund the vision where the church may not be able to or whatnot. So it's really helps you, like when you start a business, you're creating yourself. Maybe you don't have margin, but you're creating yourself more vision and more capability to do more in the future. So it all comes down to that vision that you see in your head, what you're trying to accomplish. So I will just say, if you're listening to this and you're like bored with your life or you're broke, be willing to go all in.
It's good.
Be willing to risk it all because Tyler, you were saying earlier, the risk reward, like it's totally worth it.
Yeah. And what we started this episode with is what we'll end this episode with. If you want what nobody else has, you've got to be willing to do what no one else is doing.
Yeah, you've got to hear that.
And you have to hear that. Again, from Jerry Rice or Thomas Jefferson or whoever you choose to hear that from, hear it. You have to do it. And it's a season and it's scary and it's big and it's whatever, but it's all doable. And if we can do it, we can do it. I would believe anybody can.
That's right. So if you want to talk more, why don't you head to you'vegottahearthis.com. You can schedule your personal coaching call with us. We're not the experts. We're not going to be able to push the magic button for you. Yeah. We may tell you things that make you laugh. make you cry, probably ruffle your feathers and tell you what you're not willing and the excuses you're making. But it may be that coaching call you need to take that step to see that business that's in your head come to life.
That's good.
To defy those limitations and build that life that you love. We want that for you. We want to see you just crush it. If we can be a resource, definitely check us out, book a call. We want to help you defy those limitations.
That's right. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of You've Got to Hear This, and we will see you soon.